contacted her. Now, you said you had been working in the background on COVID-related material. So why don't you tell everybody what made you the person that Barry decided to put in San Francisco? And then tell us who you were particularly interested in tracking down, because you said you had a list. And so walk us through that. Like why you, and then who you were particularly interested in investigating, let's say.
So I am considered, I think, by a lot of people, I'm the first journalist in America to write for a major publication very early, I think it was the first week of May, to call for, to question the idea that schools should remain closed in America. And that kind of launched me on the path that I've been on until today, speaking with you right now.
That was when? When did you do that?
This was, I think, the first week in May, I published this piece. So in April, I started...
May of what?
Oh, I'm sorry, 2020. So the very beginning...
May of 2020.
Correct, yeah. Like anyone else, there was no such thing as a COVID beat prior to the pandemic, but I observed very early on that something seemed off to me. Initially, I was very nervous. I wasn't cavalier about what was happening with the pandemic, but by the middle of April, we started observing, I live right outside New York City, we started observing that cases began to drop precipitously. And we also began getting information from Europe that schools were beginning to open at the end of April, and they were projected to open in the beginning of May in many locations. Coupled with that, there was a lot of data coming out of China, out of Italy, and elsewhere, and it was unanimous that children were at extraordinarily low risk. So all of these factors coming together, and I'm like, well, wait a minute. Why is the school still closed? I'm trying to understand this, particularly once they were opening elsewhere. And so I come from a background as a fact checker. This is before fact checking became kind of politicized the way it is now, where there are these special fact checking websites. But I worked for Condé Nast magazines for a number of years. And that sort of training, I think, and also just my own personal disposition, I'm always skeptical about things. That's just for a blessing and a curse. And you kept hearing about the experts are saying this, the experts are saying that. And my go-to, because when you fact check an article, you always have to go to the source, or at least that's the ideal thing. You never just take someone's word for it, or you don't take just, something's printed in the New York Times. That's never sufficient, or at least it's not ideal.
Particularly
well, I don't want to pick on the Times, but any publication, you want to go as close as you can. You're never done, in a way. So even if someone says something, first you have to fact check, well, did that person actually say it? But then even if that's true, you then want to say, well, is what they are saying true? And then you have to go layers deeper. So anyway, that kind of mindset, that's always been how I view the world. And I started observing these things, and something seemed off to me. And to my amazement, no one seemed to be writing about this, at least not in any of the major publications that I typically read. And I couldn't understand what was going on. I've written for The Atlantic, The New York Times, New York Magazine, a lot of, I guess what are termed sort of legacy, media outlets for many years. So I had contacts at these places. I knew editors, and I started reaching out to people saying, hey, why aren't you writing about this? I've put together this compendium of research. I mean, it was like a bullet list, a mile long of all the data about children, all the stuff, and no one seemed to be writing about this. I couldn't figure out what was going on. I was turned down by every publication, just about, except for one editor at Wired, who said, you know what? Everything you wrote here, in my pitch to him, this all checks out. Like, I try to make... Like everyone, I make mistakes. I'm sure in every article there's something wrong, but I try to be very meticulous, and I try to make my case almost like a lawyer, airtight. And when I presented...
Why do you think you were turned down so universally, apart from... I mean, look, it's not that... It's the default to a suggestion for an article is to be turned down. So
That's
we
right.
should start with the fact that it's a high baseline probability, but you seem to be indicating that in this particular case, the baseline was a little bit higher than normal, even though you had quite a compendium of facts and it was a germane topic.
It's a very good point. An independent writer, the default is to be turned down. However, this was really solid. Like, you have a sense as a writer, at least I do after a while, of like, I could sell this like that. I had a month earlier, a few weeks earlier, I had written a piece that I think was the #1 read piece in the New York Times. It was about this newlywed couple who are stranded in the Maldives. I have a good sense of when something's real and when it can hit. And I was kind of astonished that I was like, I found this special thing. I found a lane for myself. No one seems to be writing about this. All the stuff is true. This is my lane. Like, I'm definitely going to nail this, because that's what, it's exciting sometimes about journalism. When you find this thing that's important, that's true, that's interesting, and no one else is doing it. And that's what happened. And so